Here we are today at an archaeology site. This is a couple things that have been found. This is a piece of pottery.
So this is a real piece of pottery?
This is a real piece of pottery. The nice thing about what's happening with archaeology, although everybody talks about it being so destructive, if this wasn't done, these things wouldn't be protected. This is what archaeology does now. It protects our culture, it protects our stories, and more stories come from this as they do research on it. This is another piece they found. This you'll love. This piece is approximately 8,000 years old.
8,000?
8,000 years old. So we've got all this culture, all of our history, all of our stories that we've been following everywhere we got in the ground still. So from my perspective as an archaeologist, that's why I try and protect all this, and that's why I try and make sure that it's done with First Nations people. The programs have changed now. There's a lot of Indigenous people working on the sites, which has never been done before. It's always done by the colonial side. Our stories are now being told by our own people and protected by our own people.
Preservation is a really complex discussion from an Indigenous perspective because we preserve our culture by living every day because we live with our stories.
That's true, but the thing with archaeology people need to understand is archaeology is here when things are found because there's no markers or anything to show where we were. So archaeology is done to protect the stuff that will be destroyed by development, right? So there's a great reason for archaeology.
And everything that's in the ground here just further proves that all of the Indigenous knowledge, the creation stories that I've been handed down are true.
That's the point. All right, well, give me back the point. My name is Kris and Sarain. I am an archaeologist and artist. My grandmother was a residential school survivor who hid her true identity from our family. I am on this journey to find my truth, reconcile the past, and continue the legacy that was stolen from her.
I'm Sarain Fox. I'm an Anishinaabe from Batchewana First Nation, and I belong to the Three Fires Midewin Medicine Society. The movement of Indigenous knowledge revitalization is thriving across Turtle Island, and I want to introduce Kris and all of you to the revolutionary work being done by those who have dedicated their lives to shifting colonial narratives by harnessing Indigenous knowledge. We are the future our ancestors dreamed of. Our prophecies tell us that the time is now to reclaim, rematriate, and revitalize the knowledge intended for us. This is future history.
The museum issue is such a double-edged sword, Sarain. I mean, First Nations people and Indigenous people do not want it coming out of the ground. Some do, and they want it to be preserved. Now, that's from my point of view, but as a traditional person, how do you feel about that?
I just don't think that the whole ideology around preservation is a good enough argument to go over the heads of spiritual people and tell them what to do with their ceremonial artifacts.
I'm not against that at all. What I am against is the fact that they could be destroyed, and there are plenty of examples of that happening. There's also plenty of examples of First Nations communities now working with museums where they actually go in and they care for the artifacts, and they actually take those artifacts out and use them in ceremony when the ceremonies are there. And they come back, you know, and they're protected again. So an amazing example of what we're talking about is Tom Hill. Started the Woodland Cultural Center here on the reserve. That's what they do. Hey Tom, how are you?
How are you?
Thanks for having us. Very nice to see you.
Hi. My name is Tom Hill, and I'm a Kanadaha Seneca from Six Nations. In 1982, I moved to the Woodland Cultural Center and took the position of the museum director. Initially, in 1988, there were a lot of problems. And the big issues were, of course, was repatriation. Here in this community, it was the false face masks. The masks were always part of the museum, and they were used to talk about the exotic, they did not really tell the whole story. They didn't really know if they wanted the museum to be telling our story. Within the Indian communities, they were not comfortable with museums. You know, schools or teachers of the community that do not go to the museum to teach about a religious act about their own religion. And so in the same token, there's kind of a vibe in the community. Well, why should we? We should, you know, if they want to learn, they should come to us, and they learn it within the traditional setting. Museums and First Peoples will work together to correct inequities that have characterized the relationship in the past, in particular the desire and authority of First Peoples to speak for themselves should be recognized and affirmed by museums. Well, one thing that this policy did give was to allow Native people the opportunity to give visitors authenticity. There are basic educational institutions, and that's what museums are supposed to be doing, is teaching people who do not know about our culture, but everybody's culture within the museum context. Not only do they relay the culture, but most importantly, they authenticate, I guess you'd say, the history of our people. I'm very encouraged that there are Indian people involved in some way, whether it's a dance instructor, whether they're singing, whether they're docents, you name it, they're involved. Now we're getting more truth.
We're in Ottawa, and I imagine that this city must be absolutely jam-packed of monuments. What Jamie Cobo is doing is pretty revolutionary because with her Indigenous walking tours, she's actually filling in the full story. What we see on the plaque is only the colonial perspective, and without an Indigenous voice, then there's no way to reframe the colonial narrative.
I'm excited to see the pieces as a sculptor for sure, and to see what the narrative is.
All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights.
It's in all the languages.
Anishinaabe,
Yeah.
King, Owase, Karanajigbig.
Hi guys.
Hey, how are you?
Good to see you.
So good to see you.
Yeah.
Jamie, this is Kris.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming.
Found the Human Rights Monument.
Tell
I was
us
trying
about
to
it.
read
Yeah,
this. I thought maybe it was Ojibway, but I think it's Algonquin.
Yeah, exactly. Because we're on the territory of Anishinaabe, Algonquin, they have one of the largest panels in Anishinaabe mountains. And there's actually 73 different panels, all in Indigenous languages, and they say peace, rights, and equality.
all just on this
all of
monument?
them.
That's right.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jamie, what is Indigenous Walk?
So Indigenous Walks is something that came to me, I think, in 2013 after I finished a job at the National Gallery of Canada, and I was doing tours there and realized that people are really wanting to learn about Indigenous issues, and I felt that through art, through monuments, through landscape and architecture, that people could understand at their own pace the social, political, and cultural issues from an Indigenous perspective.
Do we get to go on the tour with
Yeah,
you?
sure, follow me.
Okay, let's go.
When you're talking about inspiration, about why else I would want to have the walking tours, I noticed some of the monuments where it was about, for instance, the famous Five. And it's a mixed feeling monument because I go there and I want to celebrate women having the right to vote. But guess what? They're huge proponents of advocating for First Nations to have the right to vote. So I have a lot of mixed feelings about it. And that's another reason I decided to put the walks into place here. So now we're at the back of City Hall. This is where a lot of people will come and the police will graduate and get their certificates here. And But then there's this monument right here. Walking around, I thought, this has really nothing to do with Ottawa or anything I'm interested in. And then I started reading, and it said this is erected by the citizens of Ottawa to the memory of W.M.B. Osgood and John Rogers, who fell in action on Cut Knife Hill. This is commemorating 2 people who fell, but says nothing about the Métis and the Crees who lost their life during this time. And it talks about the Northwest Rebellion. Words like rebellion labels us rebels when we're actually resisting. Even before Canada was a country, we were resisting. What is this monument telling the rest of the world that comes here to figure out what it's about?
And what is it telling our children who learned this history?
So this is beautiful, this park.
Yeah, this is Confederation Park. So exactly as it is, there's several monuments in this park that talk about Confederation. This one is a monument that has been here for a very long time to commemorate British Columbia's 100 years of being a part of Confederation. And then it says from 1871 to 1971, this is a monument from all the native peoples in British Columbia. Oh. And I'm like, first of all, looking at the time, and then I'm looking at what it says, and I'm like, what's going on between 1871 and 1971? And of course, 1876, when the Indian Act was implemented. And so I'm thinking about this time of our culture being extremely suppressed, and that this is somehow a gift from all the native people of British Columbia. There was no backing of any Aboriginal organization. So it's basically from British Columbia, who commissioned Henry Hunt to do the poll and said this is from all the native peoples of British Columbia. Aesthetically speaking, it's a beautiful piece, so that's not the issue that I have. It's the representation of this pole being in Confederation Park, celebrating a milestone for Canadians and using the guise of Indigenous representation.
That's why it's so important what you're doing, because without a living history, an accurate representation, there's no possible way for our stories to be told in the right way.
That's right.
And I've actually been on quite a few pretty nerdy walking tours. I've been on the ghost walk tours, and I have never seen an Indigenous perspective. I think it's mandatory that you should make sure that this happens in every single city across this country.
And actually that's one of my big goals, and I've really dreamed about having Indigenous Walks tour in every city, not just in Canada, but around the world. I want to learn about Indigenous people all over the world.
Bonjour, Bazovik Indigenicos, Maingan and Dodam, Nijam Badavion. My English name is Keenan Kijik.
My name's Eli Snake. I'm from Chippewa Towns First Nation. I reside in Oneida at the moment. I originally come from Chippewa, Muncie, and Oneida.
I started getting into this my first year of social science and First Nation studies. We did a museum project about decolonization. And one of the most interesting things that I found at the museum was their 3D printer. They are now starting to look at 3D printing a lot of artifacts so that we can return the most sacred artifacts back to the home communities where they can be looked after and cared for properly.
Being here at the worksite is just listening to a lot of stories about different parts of history. It really just got my mind thinking, really asking questions from where I come from, what my people do, where my people actually came from, besides where they ended up. Like when you find a piece of history that your ancestors touched before you, it's something new. It's a feeling that I can't even explain myself.
It has really caught my interest in something that I really want to do in the future. So I've been pretty lucky enough to actually be able to find a job like this in the summer and to actually use some of the knowledge that I learned all throughout this year. I took an archaeology course. That has just opened my eye to everything that goes on in Southern Ontario. There's so much history here that we don't know about yet, and it's something like this that you really need to do to actually get to know it. So I think it's really been an honor to be part of that.
You learn a lot of stuff about your own history, your own people, and how far we actually traveled, and how many other people that we didn't even know about were here. So yeah, I'd really recommend it to the younger generation.
Barashi Museum, and this is where the Manitoba Mukluk Story Boot School happens. And the Barashi Museum has one of the largest collections of moccasins and mukluks, and I think that the relationship with museums has been so complex and so complicated that it's hard to find a way to navigate that. And for me, my work with Manitoba Mukluks has been my way of contributing to that narrative. And Sage Pedagoose is one of the Story Boot School teachers, and she'll tell you just how amazing and wonderful it is to see both non-Native and Native people actually get to make their own pair of mukluks or moccasins and reclaim that ancient Indigenous knowledge and propel it into the future.
Bonjour. Bonjour.
Hey, so good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Honey and Sage, pleasure to meet you. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, welcome.
Bonjour. Mashko de bejeke was ko Indigenous cause, most consendo dem, atikmik shingin donjaba, Toronto and Dinda. My name is Buffalo Sage Woman, and I come from the Elk clan, and I also was raised in my home community at Tikmikshing, which is 4 hours north of here. And I teach here at the Manitoba Mukluks Story Boot School. So it's a pleasure to have you here.
Well, so far you're saying that, but I haven't had scissors yet, so.
What I have here is actually a template, and it's of Sarain's dainty little foot. So what we're gonna be doing is actually tracing that out onto the hide. We have this space here.
We could turn it around and save some more leather.
Yeah.
So Sage, what is it like when you teach people their very first time?
I think we have a lot of people who want to have it perfect. It's a big step to get over their fear of failure. We have to start from somewhere, and that it comes with experience, and it comes from making those mistakes, and we don't all just start by making perfect pieces.
So when you get one pattern done, do you just put this on top and make another pattern? Then you have the same mistakes twice?
No, you actually both did a very good job, so we're just gonna flip it over. We'll find another spot. So this time you can trace.
Okay. Pressure's on me now.
Yeah.
All right.
So Sage, how did you hear about the Story Boot School, and then how did you become a teacher here?
I was always inspired by the fact that it was Aboriginally owned and operated. In applying for the position, I wasn't sure I would even get it. Like, it was just kind of like put myself out there kind of situation. And I knew I had the support of my friends, like you, Sarain, to endeavor at like putting myself in a leadership role, in a teaching position. You don't often see youth in that role. And I knew I had a special responsibility to the students, that they can do it too. Take the teachings that they've received and they can put it to use and thrive off of it. We have that here for you, so okay. I'm gonna ask you to thread that.
So much of moccasins and how I value them changed for me when I think about them in the lodge. And I think about how impactful each step is. This concept that every time you put your foot down, you're leaving a mark that is then seen forever by your ancestors.
It's important to always include Indigenous knowledge in the moccasin making. They're so related, and I don't think they're separable. That's what separates like any old pair you can buy at the store and ones that you can make here at the school.
To be honest, I never had any idea this was this hard. This is a real skill. I mean, this is art.
It's actually kind of fascinating, like where your concentration will take you. It kind of makes me think of my ancestors 100 years ago. What kind of time were they putting into their own creations? And so I do feel that connection. If only I could be there beside them creating, I wonder what my artwork would look like today.
Oh, my.
Wow!
Nice work.
Yeah, good job.
Yeah, thank you. All right, now we gotta go and I'm sad.
Hey again.
As soon as we crossed the river, I was like,
So what do we want to talk about?
Unsurrendered alcohol.
Hi. It's weird.
think this room kind of tells a story that no one knows about. Every one of the boots in here, every one of these moccasins in here, every one of the garments in here have been worn by our ancestors. And as we watch the regrowth in our communities and we listen to the beautiful people we've spoken with, it's still so painful to sit here and look at all these beautiful things and realize that all these ancestors have gone before us, and it feels like they're tucked away and hidden in a room.
Things will be different. And in the future, we won't need to hold so tightly onto things like this and store them away to be protected, because who we are as a living people,
Living culture, we still are.
that's what will be protected. And so I want to honor all of the ancestors who live
Here today with us now.
Say chimigwich kichimano. But oh, but I don't go queen this Nikas what was she and Dodam Anishinaabe queen del Bajuan and Dodam so with gratitude and respect.
And memory.